Arizona Cardinals look like they're gonna be the worst team in the NFL this upcoming season. And frankly, they did it to themselves. I don't think there's been a team entering a season as bad as the Cardinals are since maybe the 2017 Browns, who, by the way, went 0-16. Arizona is really, really bad, and usually when a team is awful, there are some young players to point out or some good reasons to watch, but that's not really the case in Arizona. On paper, they suck, and there's not anything fun about them or really anything interesting. That is, unless you want to see a first-year head coach get hung out to dry with an incredibly disappointing roster. The Cardinals were already in an awful spot this year, mainly because of quarterback, the most important position on the field. Kyler Murray tore his ACL in week 14 of last season, and still he's not 100%. You know, that's kind of a big problem, and without him to start in week 1, it seemed like Colt McCoy was going to be the starter. He started in 6 games for Arizona over the past 2 seasons, and has started in 36 in his 13-year NFL career. It just made sense. He's a very capable backup, and Arizona has honestly been very lucky to have him over the past few seasons. Well, he's not going to be the starter because the Cardinals released him during their cut to 53. That leaves a pretty big question mark at quarterback. I guess in an attempt to fix the self-inflicted problem, Arizona ended up trading a 2024 4th rounder for Josh Dobbs in a 7th. So essentially it's a pick swap. Dobbs started 2 games for the Titans last year, and those are his only starts of his career since being drafted in 2014. There really isn't much excitement with him, but there may be with Clayton Tune. He was a 5th rounder out of Houston and is coming off of a 4,000-yard, 40 touchdown, and 10 interception season. Now, no, it's not exactly normal for a 5th rounder to start week 1, but I guess anything's possible in Arizona. Josh Dobbs isn't really that much better of an option, so who really knows who they're going to throw out there week 1? At the very least, Kyler Murray isn't going to be back until at the earliest week 5 because he's starting the season on the PUP list. It's only been 1 offseason since Murray signed a 5-year, $230.5 million extension. And there's some good news and some bad news. The good news, the contract does have an out after the 4th year. The bad news, the extension doesn't even start until next year. Yeah, that's not exactly ideal and really makes it difficult if the Cardinals want to draft a quarterback come next April. As it stands right now, the Cardinals are essentially projected to have the 1st and 2nd pick at the draft. Now, that'll probably not be the case, but their odds to get the 2 top picks is super high. They obviously have their own selection, and yeah, they should suck, so it should be pretty high, but they also have the Texans selection. Houston traded up to 3 to take Will Anderson this past draft and gave up their 12th overall pick plus a 2nd and a 1st and 3rd in 2024. The Cardinals got a lot back, and surely that'll help them for the future. The question now becomes what they'll do if they have the 1st overall pick. Short of a complete meltdown this year, Caleb Williams should go 1st overall. Arizona does have Kyler Murray, but he's been hurt and really just hasn't lived up to expectations. The contract does complicate things though. Either go take Williams and figure out what to do with Kyler, or you can get an absolute haul like the Bears just got for a team to jump up to 1. Regardless, both of those will help the Cardinals' future a ton, and they really need all the help they can get. Since Bruce Arians retired for the first time after the 2017 season, the Cardinals have had a ton of issues at head coach. Steve Wilkes was only there for 2018 and got fired after a 3-13 record. That was also the lone Josh Rosen year, who also only got a single season in Arizona despite being the 10th overall pick. Then the Cardinals selected Kyler Murray 1st overall, and Cliff Kingsbury was also hired. Now, Cliff definitely didn't have much success in 4 seasons. It just wasn't working, so the Cardinals decided to fire him. That brings us to the new head coach for Arizona, Jonathan Gannon. He may be the most uninspiring coach in the whole league. There's really not a lot of excitement or intrigue there. He was the defensive coordinator for the Eagles for the past 2 seasons, who were very good, but honestly, I think I could have made that defense look competent with all that talent. It's kind of hard to give him too much credit there, but some is deserved. It just feels like right now, Jonathan Gannon's fate is gonna be the same as Steve Wilkes. He'll get a year and then just get the boot reboot after some sort of tanking. It's the same thing that the Texans have done in back-to-back seasons, where David Culley and then Lovie Smith had a single year and then were fired. Honestly, I hope I'm wrong about that. I find myself rooting for Arizona a lot, and even more than that, I hate when coaches get literally a single year and then get the boot. Unless you're like a complete moron of a head coach, like an Urban Meyer type of guy, you should get some time to prove yourself, especially with a shit roster from day one. And the Cardinals are just a really bad football team when it comes down to it. The Arizona Cardinals probably have one of the worst rosters in the league right now, but how much of that was by design? The Cardinals already had plenty of dudes past their prime last year, like JJ Watt, who did have a solid year but recently retired. Zach Ertz is still there at tight end, and then DeAndre Hopkins was on the roster but was released back in May. I get that they owed him a lot of money, and I do think he's on the back end of his career, but it's not like the Cardinals use the cap space on anything else. They still have $26.8 million in cap space that they just aren't using. That means they're spending $154.5 million of the cap, but hilariously, $47.3 million of that is dead cap. That's the 6th highest in the league. There's just a clear lack of caring when it comes to the current roster, and it's obvious. The wide receiver core is also very weak. Marquise Brown is the number 1, and he's actually a solid receiver, but I do think he's much more suited for a 2 role. Then there's Rondale Moore, who I personally love in fantasy this year. He's only had 400 yards in his 2 NFL seasons, but he should have a bigger role in 2023 and only played in 8 games last year. Then there's Greg Dortch, shout out Richmond. He grew up around us and was actually pretty good last season with almost 500 yards. Still, it's a weak wideout room, and that's partially why I think they'll rely on the run game so heavily. And James Conner is going to be the RB1. He's as solid as they come. He's had 700 yards in each of his past 3 seasons dating back to Pittsburgh, and he's been known to be a touchdown machine at times. Although I don't expect the Cardinals to score too many this year. Then Keontae Ingram should get the rest of the carries after he didn't get too many touches as a rookie in 2022. Now for the bad news for everyone on that offense. It's that the offensive line kind of sucks. Arizona did just take Paris Johnson Jr. 6th overall. He's slated to start the season at right tackle and will definitely be a guy to keep an eye on. Veteran DJ Humphries will be opposite of him, and Will Hernandez and Elijah Wilkinson are at the guard spots. Arizona does have a new center, Yoda Froholt, I think is how you say it. Yeah, I had to look that up, and he is in fact from Denmark. Froholt finally started for the first time last season in Cleveland for 6 games, and now he'll start in Arizona. I'm trying to think of a way to really be optimistic about the Cardinals this year, but I'm having a really hard time coming up with something. As bad as the offense is, the defense is somehow even worse. Like, they're legitimately the worst defense in the league. Budda Baker is in a living hell, and there's no wonder why he wants out. There are multiple dudes starting on that defense that I just know nothing about. It's gonna be ugly, and there aren't really many positives for the Cardinals. The goal and hope for this season, I'd have to imagine, is that the Cardinals end up with the number 1 pick and maybe even more depending on how Houston does. Often, you'd see that as a good thing. Getting Caleb Williams would be huge for the Cardinals and clearly put them on the right path, but that also creates a massive problem with Kyler Murray's contract and trying to figure out what to do with him. Kyler Murray should be back at some point this season, and I guess the best case scenario for the Cardinals is that he ends up playing really well. I mean, no, not well enough to win too many games, but just good enough to the point where Arizona feels at least comfortable having him as their long-term starter. Now, if he can play well enough this season, the Cardinals might opt to trade him if he can have some kind of trade value. Maybe they'd have to eat some of his contract, but there's no doubt in my mind that he'd be a massive upgrade at quarterback for a lot of teams, especially if he's recovered from that ACL tear correctly. Just remember, if you want to laugh or cry, depending on who you root for this season, watch the Arizona Cardinals. Jackson and I will both be at the Week 1 game against the Commanders, and honestly, the Commanders are probably going to sweep the floor with them. DraftKings currently has Arizona's win total at 3.5, and just for context of how bad that really is, nobody else has a win total less than 6.5. Everyone knows that the Arizona Cardinals are gonna fucking blow this year. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the shit show, I guess.